The galaxy held its breath as the execution of the human prisoners unfolded on screens across countless worlds. Earth's leaders, who had hoped for negotiation, were struck dumb as the brutal images of their fallen soldiers were broadcasted to every corner of the known universe. The cold efficiency of the Galactic Council, leaders of the galaxy's most dominant civilizations, left no room for mercy. Their message was clear: humanity was a threat to the galaxy, and the punishment for such insolence was swift and final. General Michael "Mike" Donovan watched the broadcast from the war room on Earth, his jaw clenched tight. The bodies of his men, young, old, warriors and civilians, flashed across the screen, each one an arrow to the heart of every human watching. The room was thick with silence, every person in it aware that this was no longer just a betrayal. It was an act of war. Humanity had been marked for extinction. A slow, deliberate breath filled the space. Donovan turned, his steely eyes scanning the faces of the officers and diplomats gathered in the room. The weight of their gaze was heavy, but it was a weight he had carried for years. He could feel the anger rising within him, but he kept his voice steady. "They crossed a line," Donovan said, his voice hoarse, but unwavering. "We will not let them get away with this." Admiral Seraphine Nix's face was the epitome of composure. Her icy demeanor only sharpened the sting of her words as she responded, "You are in no position to make threats, General. The Galactic Council's decision is final. You'd be wise to accept it." The words hung in the air like a challenge, but Donovan's resolve only hardened. "You've made a mistake. You've underestimated us." Behind him, Private Emma Hayes clenched her fists, her thoughts racing. She had been in the Council's custody, only narrowly escaping death, and now her comrades, her friends, had been executed before her eyes. It felt as if the world had dropped out from beneath her. The atrocities committed by the Council were incomprehensible, but in that moment, she knew one thing: this war would not be fought with just weapons. It would be fought with the indomitable will of humanity. Hayes moved to the center of the room, her voice barely a whisper. "General, we can't just sit back and wait. We need to act. Now." Donovan turned to her, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. "It's not about rushing into battle, Private. We need a strategy. If we don't make our next move carefully, we'll lose before we even begin. But if we don't strike first, we'll lose anyway," Hayes shot back, her voice gaining strength. "We've seen what they're capable of. And they'll keep coming, unless we stop them." The tension in the room escalated. Donovan's fingers drummed the edge of the conference table. Every fiber of his being screamed for vengeance, but he knew the cost of a rash move. The fate of humanity rested on their ability to act decisively, but not hastily. A deep, robotic voice interrupted the stillness. "General Donovan, we have intercepted a transmission from the Galactic Council. It's addressed to Earth's government." Donovan straightened, the hairs on the back of his neck prickling. He stepped forward and waved for the transmission to be displayed on the central screen. The message was brief, but its implications were catastrophic. "Earth's people have shown their defiance," the voice of the Galactic Chancellor rang coldly through the speaker. "The execution of your soldiers is only the beginning. Any act of aggression will be met with the full force of the Galactic Empire. You have been warned." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving a hollow silence that settled over everyone in the room. For a long moment, no one spoke. It was as if the threat had knocked the air from their lungs. Finally, Donovan broke the silence. "Then we'll show them what humanity is capable of." His voice was a growl, tempered by grim determination. "We will fight. And we will win." Private Hayes stared at him, a fierce fire igniting in her chest. She wasn't ready for this war. None of them were. But the fire burning within her now told her one undeniable truth: humanity wasn't going to bow down. Not now. Not ever. The war room buzzed with a quiet urgency as the holographic map flickered to life. Donovan stood at its center, his gaze fixed on the blinking red dots representing key Galactic Council strongholds. Every pulse of light felt like a countdown, a reminder of the time ticking away before humanity's fate was sealed. The faint hum of machinery and the muffled voices of strategists behind him were all he could hear. The weight of the world pressed down on his shoulders. We're outgunned, outmanned, and yet, we still have one advantage. Donovan's voice broke through the tension. The one thing the Galactic Council never expected. Admiral Nix crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. And that would be? Us, Donovan replied, his tone a mixture of defiance and resolve. We fight for something they can't understand, our survival. That's a power no weapon or fleet can match. Beside him, Private Hayes clenched her jaw, barely containing the rage that had burned within her since she witnessed the execution. Survival isn't enough. We need to strike back. We need a plan. Donovan turned to face her, his eyes soft but firm. And that's why we're here. To figure out how we're going to hit them where it hurts. To show them that humanity's not just a threat, they're about to realize just how dangerous we can be when cornered. A sharp voice cut through the murmur of the room. What if we can't hit them? What if we lose before we even get started? It was Colonel Davids, one of the more cynical officers, his face hardened by years of conflict. The war's not over until it's over, Colonel, Donovan replied with a sharp edge. And we are just getting started. The officers exchanged glances, the weight of those words sinking in. The general wasn't offering false hope. He was speaking with the certainty of a man who had faced impossible odds and prevailed. And yet, even he couldn't ignore the truth, the scale of this war was beyond anything humanity had ever known. We have limited resources, Admiral Nix interjected. The Galactic Council's technology far outmatches ours. Any attempt to fight directly will be catastrophic. Donovan's eyes narrowed, but his voice remained steady. We fight differently then. We use their arrogance against them. Private Hayes stepped forward, the fire in her eyes unmistakable. We need to hit them fast. Disrupt their fleets. Make them question whether we're worth the effort. If we drag this out, they'll pick us off one by one. Donovan's gaze flickered to the map again, tracing the lines of enemy-held space. I've been thinking about that. A small strike force. Hit their logistics centers, damage their supply lines. If we cripple their ability to move forces, they'll have to divert resources to maintain their fleets. It'll buy us time. Hayes's expression softened, but the intensity didn't leave her eyes. And what's the catch? The catch is, Donovan said, the enemy won't just stand by and let us attack. They'll retaliate. Hard. Silence enveloped the room as the officers processed the gravity of the plan. The idea of attacking was bold, reckless, even, but it was the only option left. Colonel Davids spoke again, his voice low. You're proposing a suicide mission. A handful of ships against fleets. That's not strategy, that's desperation. Donovan's gaze locked with the colonel's, his jaw clenched. Desperation is what we've been living in since the moment the council executed our men. If you can't see that, then maybe you should sit this one out. A sharp breath escaped from Hayes, the tension in her body palpable. She moved toward the table, spreading a set of star maps before Donovan. I've seen their supply depots, she said. There's a weak point here. Her finger traced a narrow channel between enemy-controlled systems. They think it's secure, but it's actually a vulnerability. Donovan studied the map, eyes narrowing. He had his doubts, but he knew Hayes wouldn't present an option unless she was certain. Her passion wasn't just anger, it was calculated fury, the kind that could burn down entire empires if harnessed correctly. Then it's settled, Donovan said finally, his voice resolute. We'll hit them here. We disrupt their supply lines, force them to commit more resources to a defense, and then we keep moving, keep them on the back foot. We don't stop until they understand we're not going anywhere. The room fell silent, the weight of the decision settling over everyone like a thick fog. It was a plan born out of necessity, not hope, but it was the only choice they had. If they hesitated, they would be erased from existence. If they moved, they might just survive. Hayes turned to Donovan, her voice barely above a whisper, what happens if we don't succeed? He met her gaze, his eyes burning with a quiet fury. Then we fight until they have no choice but to acknowledge the one thing they never expected: humanity won't go down without a fight. As the final words hung in the air, the officers and soldiers began to prepare for what was sure to be a mission of impossible odds. But in their hearts, a shared fire ignited. They were going to show the galaxy that humanity was not a race to be trifled with. They were a force to be reckoned with, no matter the cost. The cold, metal walls of the command ship reverberated with the steady hum of engines as it glided silently through deep space. Donovan stood at the helm, his fingers clenched around the console, feeling the vibrations pulse through his veins like an endless drumbeat. This was it. The moment the plan would either ignite humanity's revenge or prove it was a foolish gamble. Admiral Nix stood beside him, her sharp eyes scanning the data feeds with a precision only a career strategist could muster. "We're 5 minutes out," she said, her voice a steady contrast to the chaos roiling inside Donovan's chest. "The enemy's command center is locked in on the target. They'll be expecting a diversion." "We'll give them one," Donovan replied, his gaze hard. "But only for long enough to hit their logistics hub. Once we're in, we move fast. We don't give them a chance to react." Behind them, the officers who had once believed in cautious deliberation now murmured nervously, the adrenaline and fear clear in their eyes. They had all heard the risks, knew the odds, only those who truly believed in the cause remained. And yet, Donovan couldn't shake the feeling that this was no longer just about tactics. It was about proving something to the galaxy. Private Hayes strode up, her face streaked with sweat, despite the cold temperature inside the ship. She looked worn, but there was no mistaking the fire still burning in her eyes. "Sir, the team is ready. We've got a full load of plasma charges and a strike team of 20. You'll have a way out of this, right?" Donovan turned to her, meeting her gaze with a tight-lipped smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We all know there's no way out, Hayes. But that's the point. We go in, we hit them hard, and then we give them hell until we can't." "You mean until we don't have any ships left?" Hayes countered, her voice low but fierce. "This isn't a suicide mission. We have to be smart." "I know," Donovan said. His voice softened, but it remained resolute. "But there's a point where survival stops being a calculation. You're fighting for something bigger now. Something they'll never understand." Hayes's face hardened, but before she could respond, the sound of a loud alert cut through the tension in the room. The ship's lights blinked red, and the entire command center jolted as if it had been struck by a 1,000-pound fist. "Shit," Nix muttered, her fingers flying over the controls. "They've detected us. Their fleets are moving in." A hologram of the enemy fleet appeared, a vast, swirling array of ships positioned in tight formation. It was a show of force, the kind that could reduce an entire fleet to stardust in mere minutes. "Do we have time?" Donovan asked, his voice calm despite the growing chaos. "We don't have any time," Nix replied, her face hardening with the gravity of the situation. "They're closing in. We're about to be outnumbered 5-1. We can either sit here and die, or we take that hub and send them a message they won't forget." Donovan's mind raced, but his decision came swiftly. "We take it. All units, prepare for immediate deployment. Hayes, I need you leading the ground assault." Hayes didn't hesitate. "Understood. We move in 5." A few tense moments passed as the crew prepared for what might be their last mission. But in their eyes, a steely determination burned. This wasn't just a fight, it was a statement. Humanity would not be silenced. As the transport doors slammed shut, the adrenaline coursing through Donovan's veins matched the frantic pulse of the battle unfolding outside. He could hear the roar of engines as their ship hurtled through space, cutting toward the target like a blade in the dark. "On my mark," Donovan's voice crackled over the comms. "We go in, take the hub, and make them pay for what they did." The ship's engines screamed as they punched through the enemy defenses, a barrage of energy beams lighting up the dark expanse of space like a deadly firework display. The command center glowed as shields flickered and the battle raged beyond their immediate view. As the ships collided, Donovan's heart pounded in his chest. Time slowed, every moment, every breath stretched out as if the universe itself was holding its breath, watching the human resistance take their first true swing at the juggernaut that had long oppressed them. "Now!" Donovan shouted, and the ship shuddered as the transport bay doors swung open. The command center fell silent as soldiers filed out, guns raised and ready for the fight of their lives. The glow of plasma torches reflected off their helmets, their faces set in grim determination. Hayes was the first to lead the charge, her boots thudding on the cold metal as she raced forward, a storm of fire and fury behind her. Donovan stayed close, feeling the energy of the team around him, the unity of purpose that could only exist in the face of overwhelming odds. Their mission was simple: sabotage. Destroy the Council's control over their fleet's supply chain, cripple their power. But with every footstep, with every explosion that echoed in the distance, the stakes grew higher. Donovan knew the risks. But the risks were nothing compared to the consequences of doing nothing. In a galaxy filled with giants, humanity's greatest weapon was its refusal to give up. And as the first explosions rocked the compound, Donovan felt the first crack of something bigger. Humanity was taking back its future. One fight at a time. The silence was oppressive as the explosion reverberated through the metal hallways of the Council's command center. Donovan's breath was sharp in his ears, his pulse racing as the sound of gunfire echoed through the corridors. The mission was simple: sabotage the logistics hub, cripple the enemy's fleet. But it had quickly escalated into something far more dangerous. Hayes led the charge, moving swiftly and silently with her squad of soldiers. Her eyes, hidden behind the visor of her helmet, were focused like a predator's. The mission was clear, but every step felt heavier. They had penetrated the outer defenses with ease, but now, with every second, the stakes grew higher. Every hallway they crossed, every door they breached, the countdown clock ticked louder in Donovan's mind. The soft hum of the ship's lights above mixed with the louder thrum of his own heartbeat. Donovan kept his hand on his weapon, but his mind wasn't on the threat in front of him, it was on the larger picture. There were decisions to be made, a war to win. This mission was a step. One crucial step toward proving humanity's power. But would it be enough? "Check the corridor," Hayes's voice crackled over the comms, low but tense. "We're close to the hub. If we move too quickly, we risk detection. Keep tight." Donovan nodded, even though she couldn't see it. He motioned to his team, signaling them to fan out. The metallic floors clicked under their boots, and the faintest hiss of breath filtered through their comms. "We're not alone," someone whispered. "Quiet," Donovan hissed, pulling a weapon from his side. "I don't care if it's rats or soldiers. Stay focused." He had always relied on his crew's ability to act with precision, to move like a single unit, one mind behind many bodies. But this was different. With the clock ticking, every movement felt like a countdown to something inevitable. The team pushed forward. The passage ahead grew darker, the flickering lights casting ominous shadows against the walls. Donovan's thoughts wandered to the risk of failure. Could they truly defeat a force that had crushed entire civilizations? The weight of responsibility pressed on him, threatening to choke his resolve. As they reached the final hallway leading into the core of the logistics hub, the door loomed ahead, tall, reinforced, and pulsing with a low-energy hum that betrayed its importance. Hayes glanced back, her voice steady but sharp. "We go in fast and hit them hard. You'll get one shot at this, Donovan. Don't waste it." He nodded, stepping up to the control panel beside the door. With practiced ease, he punched in the override code, his heart thudding as the seconds dragged by. There was a hiss, then the door slid open, revealing the enemy's heart, a massive control room filled with consoles, terminals, and a central command array that controlled the entire fleet's supply lines. It was a marvel of engineering, cold and efficient. And it was about to come down. The first wave of soldiers rushed in, guns blazing, but the enemies were ready. Laser blasts erupted, a searing streak of light as the enemy fired back with ruthless precision. Donovan dove behind a console, his mind whirling. The chaos was palpable: screams, the smell of ozone from plasma fire, the acrid stench of sweat and fear. "Hold the line!" Donovan shouted, firing over the top of his cover. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through him, his body moving on instinct, but his thoughts never strayed far from the goal. They had to destroy this hub, there was no other way forward. The weight of humanity's future pressed on them all. But the enemy wasn't giving up so easily. From behind, the sound of more boots thudded on the floor, heavier, faster. A reinforcements squad. "They're flanking," someone yelled. Donovan's mind raced. They didn't have the numbers to hold off a full counterattack, but if they didn't finish the job here, humanity would lose its best chance. He turned to Hayes, who was returning fire at a nearby enemy position, her movements fluid, lethal. She didn't hesitate. "Hayes, get to the core!" Donovan shouted, pointing to the massive energy relay at the heart of the command center. "We destroy that, we cripple them. We're out of time." She shot him a glance, her face a mask of determination. "Cover me, or we won't make it." Without another word, she sprinted, dodging incoming fire, her team right behind her. Donovan followed, leading his own squad toward the enemy's flank, trying to draw attention away from Hayes' team. His heart raced, the sound of gunfire overwhelming his senses. The smell of burnt metal filled the air. For a moment, everything seemed to blur together: the fight, the stakes, the screams. All that mattered was that core. They had to destroy it, or all of this would be for nothing. As they reached the far side of the room, Donovan's comms flared to life again. "Donovan, we're in position," Hayes said, breathless, her voice barely audible over the explosions. "On your mark." "Do it," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. With a deafening roar, the core exploded in a violent wave of energy, a blinding flash of light and heat that sent the entire room into chaos. For a moment, everything was white. The command center shook, metal groaning as the power grid shorted out. Then, silence. Donovan struggled to his feet, his ears ringing. The room was dark, filled with smoke and debris. Hayes appeared in front of him, covered in soot but unscathed. "We did it," she said, a smile tugging at her lips. But before Donovan could reply, a voice crackled over the comms, the unmistakable tone of a victory declaration that sent chills down his spine. "This isn't over," the voice said, cold and menacing. "You started something. But you will not finish it." And with that, the true test began.